Our lives depend on automotive cybersecurity, inside vehicles as well as outside of vehicles, so that a vehicle we are driving could never drive us off the cliff, or if there's a vehicle on the street that could come upon us and hit us. So that is not happening. That's a certain challenge. That got even more because of the internet. So for today, I'm going to give you a little overview on what technology we are using, that this is not happening, those bad things. They are very mature, very optimized to operate in extreme environments and also with homologation constraints of the governments. In the later part, I will go deep into how the formal analysis can be done, and how with attack graphs you can shift left the security and find out how seemingly minor vulnerabilities could escalate to a real exploit. So here in our talk, you feel free to ask questions at any time. The questions you can raise with the catch box, with just raising the hand or just starting to shout, all is possible, so that you can take the most with you. So that's your big advantage. Everybody here in this room can ask something easily so that your topic is addressed here at any time. For the normal disclaimer, of course, it's all my personal views, none of my employers, no liability, etc. But who am I to speak about that? I did a lot of research. I got my PhD in the automotive security analyzer for exploitability risks. And I also worked at the BMW 7 Series onboard networks in the years 2008 to 2015. And a part of my IT security career, I was before that doing software engineering and computer science at the university. Plus, I was a soldier for electronic warfare in Frankenberg-Ida. For the first part, we'll go into the basics of the onboard networks. The second part on the typical attacks that you see outside that are happening usually. And then lastly, in the third part, we go deep into the graph analysis. What is that? Why we do that? Because of the internet. The vintage Firebird, you said, wonderfully. That one was not connected to internet, had not those problems. Your old ones that are more than 25 years old do not have those either. But for more than 2 decades, we're connecting them to the internet already, and so we have to. So the board network, fortunately, or unfortunately, whatever, is not an all-IP network. But there is hundreds of computers that are connected with CAN, MOST, LIN, FlexRay, broader reach. And they're not those usual things like an Intel or an ARM, but many highly specialized ones. And that is for the maximum of efficiency, for the maximum of sustainability. It has to be stable and work and reliable for all the time. Do you have an idea how heavy this network could be? Is it more than a kilogram? Probably would say most of them. Is it more than 5 kilograms? Is it more than 10? More than 50? Yeah, it's more than 50 kilograms. So you really have to make sure everything is really, really at the very most efficient way. And that brings us to the very first question that I've heard often from IT people. Why don't we use Ethernet? Because of weight, for example. Ethernet requires 8 wires, so that 1000 base T. It requires 8 wires, twisted pair and shielded, instead of only 2 wires like CAN would use. So you can see the problem that if we would use Ethernet, the cars would be so heavy and also your fuel would be so much, the consumption, that it would be not sustainable. Therefore, everything has to be highly optimized. Every wire is planned ahead very, very long ago. And the wires you've seen over there, it's not just 100 meters, we're talking about thousands of meters of wire. Therefore, merely that is a real big issue. And a second thing is, it's so much cheaper to have CAN and LIN than Ethernet. And why is this so important? Because you want to have a cheap car, of course, you want to have it affordable. And if you scale it up, if you just build not just one car, but many, a very easy calculation here. If you say 3 euros from CAN to Ethernet, you have at least 10 nodes of those 200 computers. You build 2 million cars per year, you'd have 60 million euros you would need for that as costs. With 60 million euros, how about instead hire 100 engineers? So more than the room here, just hire the people, use 100,000 euros for each of them, and you still have 50 million euros left over to invest in future technology. That hard it is in automotive. You have to really think about every single euro. And there's really great things. There are the most FlexRay and CAN from the cost perspective, and most you might have never heard of. It's a nice optical fiber technology. Did you ever see that? That cars for a long time, for example, the BMW 7 Series, since 2001 has optical fiber in the car, and that can go up to 150 megabits per second. There is something similar to Ethernet, which is broader reach. Broader reach is compatible to Ethernet on the layer 2, but it's a lot lighter. It's only 2 wires, and it's already in cars for quite some time here at the BMW X5 since 2013. And if you go into more critical applications, because car consists not just of infotainment, but also critical stuff like brakes, then you go into like FlexRay and ByteFlight. Those technologies, they have been originally invented by the BMW Group. Now a big consortium is doing that, and it can guarantee you in this and that milliseconds that the frame will get through. Ethernet could not do that, but FlexRay can guarantee you that. That one, most of you might know, the controller air network. It's from 1983, and it's still predominant in the cars, and for a good reason, because very efficient and cheap. Even if there's a collision on the network, your data will get through, because CAN is a so-called CSMA-CR, Carrier Sense Multiple Access Collision Resolution. So if 2 frames are colliding, the more important one wins automatically, and will get through. That is possible with CAN, but not with Ethernet. And the least expensive one is LIN. So if you change your seat, for example, if you switch some lights, for example, something not critical, something you do very rarely, 1 wire is enough. 1 single wire. And that combination, everything together, brings you to a very dependable network. So all your braking will get through in this and that amount of milliseconds. Here we see my colleague. This is a demonstration we did, and he's cutting a wire over there. And the moment he cuts that wire, this time critical application, it's an iron piece from an electric magnet that is held in the air, will still be up in the air, because the network is that reliable, it can reroute and still make it in time to make all the commands to keep that iron in the air. Therefore, shout out to Hans Ulrich and Dirk, I used to work with many years, and this was a real photograph back then. Furthermore, we have lots of humidity things and lots of vibration issues in such cars that have to be taken care for. And the very biggest is the certification, the homologation. Who of you has heard of homologation? What is homologation? Who knows about that? Good. Oh, one person. Very good. And for everybody else of us, except for Florian, we'll talk a little bit about what is homologation. And homologation is something you have to do. It is the governments that tell you, you must comply. You must fulfill this, you must fulfill that. And only then you're allowed to sell those cars in that country. And whenever you change something, let's say, oh, there's some vulnerability. Let's make an update. Let's make just some software change. No, it would falsify your homologation, your certification. You will not be allowed anymore to sell the car. Because it could be that your crash or your exhaust could be not that good as it was tested in the laboratory. Therefore, there's some update prohibition. That is very necessary, and we are extending that nowadays. Not we, but we as Europe are extending this. We have security audits nowadays. So there's some, like the UNEC R155, that we also have to certify that the cybersecurity is done very well. China is soon doing that too, and the US is discussing to have that too one day. So how would we do then tackle this if you're not allowed to update our software anymore? There's a possibility. You can isolate it. That is the reason why we have so many computers in a car, because there are many computers you're not allowed to update anymore. So you have a computer for your exhaust, you have a computer for your brakes, something like your airbag, and then you have a computer for your infotainment that you update constantly. And that strict isolation is one of the key things that keep your car secure very easily. The software on those, you also do whitelisting. Only those that are developed by partners can get executed on them. And those, of course, signed cryptographically. And speaking of crypto, you would not find much RSA and you would not find much IPsec in such a car. It's just too big. Not all 200 of them have enough CPU power to calculate an IPsec. Therefore, we all have to think about something more lean. How about elliptic curve cryptography instead of an RSA? That is very well established in the whole automotive industry, therefore. Very lean cryptography everywhere so that you can do that well. It was also not just segmentation of the computers, but also of the networks. Such a board network you've seen is not just one big, like IP network, but there's many branches, there's many domains. There's drive domain, infotainment domain. So there's also segmentation. If someone is infected here, it could not spread that easily, so we're there. We have an example over here where it was not that well segmented. So the hackers, Miller and Walasek, at the Black Hat 2015, they hacked this chip, and it was rather easy because they could hack into the infotainment system, which was easy because infotainment has always notoriously lots of vulnerabilities. It has to be patched constantly. But their system also had access to the CAN on-board networks, so they could start controlling car functionality and make that chip drive into the ditch. So far, we are here at the end of chapter 1. Do we have questions for the basics on technology somewhere, maybe? If not, we continue with the attackers like Miller-Walasek. So typically, the attackers would like to get the entire vehicle and sometimes just parts of the vehicle, because parts are rather expensive. So there's quite some black market to get a radio, to get some headlamps by storing it somewhere, but nowadays they are also cryptographically linked. So for example, a front camera, you cannot just unscrew and put it somewhere else, but you have to cryptographically link them again so it's working in a new car, and that is meant as theft protection, so it becomes not lucrative anymore for the black market to sell it, because you would have to be able to link it again. Odometer is also often manipulated, and there was lots of things now also in the market that this is protected. So how many kilometers has that vehicle driven already? It's in many computers now already, so you don't have to change just one thing, but a couple of computers to really make a new odometer status there. The statistics you can see here, that is the police statistics. And does anyone have an idea why in Germany there's that lot more anymore thefts than in 2000? Does anyone have an idea maybe? It's cryptography again. So it's new inventions that you not just can short circuit your car, but you have to also answer some cryptographic questions, and that made car theft harder. What do they do else? That ring, that cable, you might have often seen on YouTube. It's people extending the car keys. You might have also heard about the OBD dongles that you can just plug into a car and start some software to do something about it. And the most successful one are just the apps. Like the Jeep hack, infotainment. Attack the infotainment system, and from there on, you probably have a good chance of finding something more to control that car. There are people like Kosher and Checo et al. They showed here with a Chevrolet Impala model year 2009 how easy it is, as soon as you have access to the network, to do more on that, to do spoofing on the network, and also do reverse engineering of the software, to do that from the remote and get access to the microphone and listen, oh, what are they talking in that car? Isn't that sometimes interesting, what people are talking there? That you can find lots on the network, and it's getting well secured nowadays, but it wasn't, because people often said, that's not that many people doing that. But now, over and over, people are coming. And the more and more you look into the internet, you can find more and more hacking. Here, the Tesla hacking of the infotainment system is like widespreading. You can find it everywhere on so many black hats, DEF CON, and so on. The next Tesla hacking. And it's also from NRA's troopers. It was so good to have him here too. That also there are more exploits being shown. We are here at the end of the second chapter on the attackers. Do you have already some questions on the attackers somewhere in the audience? Yes, there's some. And also, wonderful, good.
Just a small question. There's probably some data on like attacks that were made on cars. Are they like more targeted towards a big mass of cars, or more towards singular cars to steal them or do whatever you want with them?
Mm-hmm. To my knowledge so far, it's like more the mass of the car. It's more like a commodity, let's say, crimeware thing, but not that targeted like you know from an APT, for example. Hmm. You're welcome. Are there maybe questions? Yes, there's more. And also on the basic network, feel free to also answer questions, feel free.
Okay, so my question is, do you think that if a person buys a new car today, it makes sense to do some additional measures to secure the ODB port? So would you do something additionally, or just leave the car as it is?
I would personally leave it as it is, because I know there are many good measures inside of the car, especially for the OBD, to protect it from people that are not authorized to go into it. There's nothing much we could do except for the very proper normal things like keeping your key secure. So that is the normal hygiene, that we should keep the car shut, of course, and the keys somewhere at a flat space where it's not moving around. Because that's some trick. If the key is moving around in your pocket, then the car thinks, yes, you or the owner are moving. But as soon as you put the key somewhere on the key ring at home and leave it there, it will shut off by itself and not communicate anymore with the car. So that's something you can do that no one can easily copy it because it will just stay dead there.
Would you use a Faraday cage on your key?
That is hard to do, I guess. I think it is not necessary for a new one because the newer keys have a lot better positioning. So the car knows very precisely where it is. And if you with the key are here in the conference, it would not start the car over there somewhere in the parking garage. Only if you're getting close to it. There's a couple of measurements, so there's a couple of technologies, and it depends on the energy level, to find out how close you are. And if you are standing on that side, the car can even figure out if you're standing on the right side or if you're standing on the left side of the car. That precise it is. Therefore, you don't need a Faraday cage. You just need to be away from the car. For a new car, of course.
And I have a last third question. You can decide when to answer it, maybe later in the talk. Currently in the media there is a lot of talk about the new Apple CarPlay functions, and I would be curious to hear what's your take on it. Are they really an issue or a security concern for consumers?
I would do that then later on. The short answer is that depends on how deep you integrate it.
Okay, one question. Do you think that modern cars, not the traditional automakers like Tesla or Chinese cars, they are more computer-centered? Do you think that's a security issue? Because they might not have these 200 computers connected over different buses and stuff like that. They are much simpler in that case. Are they as secure as the other ones, or what do you think?
Clear, not as secure. We have seen that with the other car over there. If you have too few computers, it's too easy to spread in the car.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So we would get into the formal analysis part. What are we doing? How can we secure the car? And if you want to have the best security, of course you would go for such a very pricey car. Like here, it's a BMW 7 Protection. It costs 400,000 euros and it protects you also from machine guns. But for normal persons like we are, we have to be more affordable. And there are new ISO standards that demand a risk-based security measurements. Therefore, how about thinking about what motivation does an attacker have? What capability does an attacker have? And if you think about that scenarios, then we can think further about, okay, what will they do then? What is the damage in 4 dimensions? So one dimension is the data inside the car. Another one is financial damage. It could rip off our credit card that is saved in there. A third one is the operational damage, and that just means it's not working anymore, and you need to get to the airport somehow. But the car is not working anymore. That's operational damage. We do not want to have that happen either. And the last one is, of course, the most important one, safety, our lives and health. So the vision is the risk with an attack graph that shows you clearly what are the steps you can get into a car and what could be the damage potential and likelihood for a probability for expected damage. And we formalized that very deeply with the automotive security analyzer for exploitability risks. I had the pleasure to just name it myself. And the very first input you need is the network topology. You have to know who can talk to who. Secondly, on each computer, how big is the surface? Do we have notoriously lots of infotainment software there, or just a very tiny thing that is just doing the airbag? What attackers are we anticipating? Is it something for a VIP, like an APT thing, or is it something like they want to steal your car? And lastly, the assets by itself, we need to know that for the algorithm. It will all get into that model in the middle, the system model, attacker profile, and an exploit model. There's some magic happening here with the algorithm, and eventually we get to that graph from the top red. That's where it accesses the network. It goes over a couple of computers down to the asset. And in real life, it looks like that. It's a Java software, and you put all those 4 things into it. You number crunch it with that algorithm, and that algorithm is designed to operate fast. So it's designed that it will comprise 95% of the possible ways, but only in a tiny fraction of the time. So it can give you something within a minute on real big car networks. And I say that so precisely because this was the complexity challenge here of the algorithm. And previous research was existing, but it took already four nodes only, half an hour. And if you have like 10 computers, it would take many years to calculate on a previous research. And this is why this is so different here. And that algorithm will output then your XML file with the probabilities and the attack graph. What you as an engineer now can do is visualize it. And then everything just became so clear. From the very top, there are 3 attack nodes, so where it starts with the attack. In the middle is your network, your car network, and down there are the assets. And it's so easy to see that if you are doing pen testing, for example, and you cannot pen test everything because there's so many things to do, but how about focusing on this or that? If you focus your energy on those 2 devices, you get the most bang for the buck. You will help to secure especially those 2 assets down here. So those have the thickest arrows, which means they have the highest risk. Of course, I had to prove and show and demonstrate that this is really working a lot better than others. So I benchmarked this against a base network. The left side is about the runtime, how fast it is. And you can see that the red part, what I did, is a lot faster. It takes only a few seconds to do that, while the base ones take a lot longer, if at all they are getting to something. The same with our memory. That new algorithm stays within 50 megabytes, while the base networks just go crazy and very often do not even yield anything out of your calculations. Do we have questions on that formal part so far? Then we will soon get into the Q&A session. And in between, if you like to read further, there is the bold European patent you can look into, where I've written a lot about the algorithm. I have also written in that German patent filing about it. And in those 3 conference papers, I've also written a lot about how it is working. And in the very end, there is 2 things. There is the software itself. It's on GitHub, the Java software. Of course, you would need also the data of the network of a car, which is, of course, inside the companies. And if you're going very, very deep and would like to see everything, you can even read my book. I wrote about 250 pages on it, and it's on the Springer Nature published. And I'm ending that book with a 1 key message that I'm also like to give to you, that you can use. You can use it for your decision makers, which is that someone can pay now to invest in proper security, or pay later in lost lives, assets, and revenue. And therefore, I want to thank you very much for your attention and wish you a safe and secure ride.
Right before I can give this cube to you, Francois, I have to say thank you. Thank you, Martin, for your talk and for also making us feel a little safer in our cars, if we are not driving Tesla. I think there's different problems with that. So let's get to you, Francois, and your question.
Okay, yeah. At the beginning of the talk, when you were talking about the different types of networks and cables and whatnot, you mentioned domains, right? Like kind of separating different domains, like more like physical interaction with like motors and whatnot versus infotainment. In modern cars, like say that are sold today, and like major car manufacturers in Germany that you know more about, are they like physically separate, like those domains, or they're logically separated with kind of firewalls, or if you will? Because I remember back in the Charlie Miller era, that was more of a kind of logical separation of those domains.
So there are some physically separated ones, but most are connected with gateways. Because very often you have some feature. You have some developer who says, oh, I need that data over there. And to connect those, you'll have then a gateway that will transpose exactly that information over there. For an attacker, it is still rather hard to get over the gateway, because if you just have access to one network, you can of course send that one single frame to the other network, but you cannot just send any other frame into that network and spoof any other frame, because the gateway would just ignore it. The gateway would only transpose this very one single data frame.
Yeah, in fact, I think I recall seeing another talk, maybe at Black Hat or something, about more or less on that exact thing. And to what extent that gateway you mentioned is just software, which could have a vulnerability just like any software, versus more of a kind of diode type of, like for nuclear stations, whereas like purely physically unidirectional data transfer that is impossible to go in the other direction. So could you talk about like those kind of gateways in actual real world cars sold today?
Yep, I can talk so far, which is there are gateways which are largely separate computers with software. So of course they potentially could be hacked too. But being an isolated gateway, they do not have that much attack surface to be attacked for. Of course, sometimes such gateways could be integrated somewhere where they're just doing this as a side job to connect to, so those are easier to hack. The diodes, I'm aware of it too, of course. I've rarely seen them in cars, I have to admit, even though they are sometimes existing in electronics.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for your question.
Right behind you.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I had a question. You talked about homologation and that there's certain systems and things that cannot be changed afterwards. Now we are evolving to a world where cars are being software defined. Is this then going to be an issue in terms of security in the future? And if so, how is the industry going to deal with that? Because we know that eventually a vulnerability will be found. Yeah, this is basically a certainty in our world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How they do that is again by minimizing the trusted code base. So of course we will get more and more software, but that software that we get is usually in other domains like infotainment. But for the part we have the homologation for, which is usually crash and exhaust, there's such a tiny software there that rarely has any vulnerabilities. For example, I personally have never heard of a software vulnerability there, but of course, if you have it in your stack, then you would have the problem. But I can tell you that there's even computers that do not have an operating system. They are that minimal that there's no OS on them. It's just a pure computer with one single application, just doing, for example, your emissions. And having a vulnerability there is very unlikely, even in the nowadays software-defined vehicles era. And in a very rare case, there would be one, then you can think of, okay, what could someone do bad, nasty, if they would, for example, have the exhausts, or let's say the crash, which is a nasty thing. Then, of course, you would have to go into that very, very hard thing of doing that homologation again. And there are even companies that totally draw back their car if they say it's not worth anymore. If they say after that many years, they just do not sell it anymore. So this is still valid. The homologation is still a strict thing that you cannot overcome even in the era of SDV, the software-defined vehicles. You just have to find more separation ways to get it separated where the vulnerabilities are and where it stays static.
You mentioned that more computers in the car tend to be safer, it's more secure. The one thing is, in my point of view, it adds to the complexity, and complexity is inherently the enemy of security. But on the other hand, BMW is currently developing its new platform with the heart of joy and whatever, and it seems that also the European vendors are tending to come down to less computers in the cars. How does that fit?
It fits very well that you have uncritical software applications getting together into something like the heart of joy, of course. But if you have something critical, something with homologation, it will still stay separate. And that actually makes it simpler. So the complexity lowers. Because if you would have this tiny critical thing inside your bigger machine, you would have so many issues with updating, with taking care about the milliseconds for the brakes. Therefore, it's actually something for simplicity to cut out that part of the equation.
So it's something like a segmentation.
Correct, it is something like a segmentation.
Right behind this pillar.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. So you mentioned that hackers often really like to get into the car system through the infotainment. Now, there's a lot of older cars that still have CAN bus connectivity in the infotainment system, but the infotainment systems are outdated. So owners go ahead and, for example, buy a new infotainment that also communicates with the CAN bus of Amazon that runs Android. or also Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Now, my question is, how do you think these systems pose a bigger or lesser risk compared to the old ones that were in the cars?
That really depends on what infotainment system you've had in before. So there are very old ones maybe that do not have much attack surface, which are like vintage almost. But in the middle ground you will find, of course, the worst thing you can find, which is probably then better to exchange with your solution you mentioned. So it is always a single case decision. It depends on the car. And you've seen that with the other car over there. So that Jeep is just one example of many. And those two Miller-Walasek researchers, they also looked at other cars. And they wrote in their publication they have chosen that car because it's just so simple in their segmentation. It's just not segmented at all. But other cars are existing that have a very strong segmentation. And we just do not see that. That's why this is such a single case decision from car to car.
Okay, so it is very much possible that you can make your car a lot less secure by installing an aftermarket infotainment system. If you decide to connect it to the CAN bus network, that is.
Correct, very correct.
Okay, thank
you. We heard a talk about the CRA, the Cyber Resiliency Act. Does that also include the cars? Do you also have to publish your risk analysis?
I'm not aware about the CRA affecting that, but cars have a rather, let's say, specific rule, which is the UNEC R155. Plus, we have the two ISO standards that are directly going into that. There are even audits happening. So the government comes into your house and would like to see how you're doing that and how you prevent all that.
But also these are industry standards. So are the UNECs, is it a law?
Yes. The UNECE R155 is obligatory. And we have here in Europe the audits going on already. So this is something that is all the OEMs, they have to do that. So all the BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, they have to do that now. And they again have to go to their suppliers and make sure it is done well. So it is a separate market with separate laws, and they're rather strict here in Europe. And China is coming soon too. They are right now preparing that.
All right, at this moment I have to cut you off because I have the feeling it could go on for 20 more minutes, but we do have a little coffee break before we get into the last block for today. And before I let you go into the coffee break and get yourself fit for the last two sessions, please take out your app and rate this talk out of 5 and give a real warm applause, my gosh, for this young man.
Thank you.